This podcast is part of the Frederick Podcast Network. Learn more at listenfrederick.com.
People often report a mood shift after spending time in nature. They're not even really sure why necessarily, but they will say, man, I feel so much better for whatever reason. And what is interesting is that it's scientifically backed that you're going to have a positive mood shift after being in nature. The New York Times had an article that referenced a scientific study that said it actually only takes 120 minutes per week, which is about 17 minutes a day, to have a therapeutic benefit from being in nature. Now, if we hear that, we think to ourselves, well, that's not much. But then you have to say, have you spent 17 minutes outside? Like really just going for a walk, going to the park, working in the garden, whatever, 17 minutes. Have you done that recently? And if not, what is preventing you from doing that? So I'm pretty outdoorsy. I like to do a lot of hiking and a lot of outside excursions. And my husband surprised me for our 15th anniversary, and he booked an REI excursion through Coastal Expeditions in South Carolina. And it was this off the beaten path. It was the first time that we would have done something that was really integrated into nature. It was the tent camping. There was no running water, no bathrooms. And our guide was this awesome guy named Tayt Stafford. And I invited him to join me on this podcast, Mental Health and Me. So are you there, Tayt?
Yes, I am. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And you are a professional naturalist guide, is that right?
That is correct.
So how much time do you think you spend out in nature a week?
Um, Probably most of my time. Thankfully, I'm very blessed to be able to do that as a career. I mean, I would say at least 8 hours a day
Wow.
outside, just looking at birds.
That's great. You know, something, and I assume you do this with every group, I'm not really sure, but when you woke up our group every day, do you remember what you said?
I'm not sure. What did I say?
You would walk through, and regardless of the weather or anything else, you walked through our little tents and said, you know, good morning. Today is going to be a great day. And we stole that line. That's how I wake my kids up. And we try to like get the Tayt vibe, you know, get that like
Oh,
sound.
very cool.
So I was
Yeah, I mean,
like,
it was, when you wake up in the woods, even if it's, I believe on that trip it was raining a little bit, but
yeah,
um,
even in the rain,
yeah.
that's how you woke us up. Today is going to be a great day. It
Yeah.
was like such a vibe to wake up to. And for me personally, a trip like that was outside of my comfort zone. I mean, I'm usually somebody who can go all day, but then I come back to a bed. And this was not a
Mhm.
bed. This was camping. But you do that quite frequently.
That trip especially was more rugged than just like overnight glamping, right? I mean, we were out in a national forest pretty much alone. So
Right.
yeah, it was kind of something that would take you away from like well, I guess like what people now is like the modern camping experience. We kind of dialed it down a little bit. It was slightly, I guess we could call it slightly primitive, huh?
Yeah, that stuck out to me a lot because I remember the one day it was raining and everybody there in the group, and it wasn't a big group, but it was like really primal. Like I felt like everybody was just dressed to survive the elements. Like there was nobody looking to have a selfie or trying to, I don't know, be an influencer. It was like, okay, what is it going to take to deal with these elements? And then we engaged in that. And I thought, man, that's probably not something we do most days, right? I mean, most days people are
Mhm.
trying to dress for some type of appearance. But on this particular trip, it was like, oh, we're really thinking about just our basic needs.
Yeah, truly, birds don't care what you look like, otters don't care, and the gators don't care either, I guess. But it is kind of funny seeing everybody standing there with their paddles and their skirts on, and which for I guess those listening, a kayaking skirt is something that goes over the cockpit, so we were all wearing those. But yeah, I mean, and especially with the rain too, it's just kind of like bundle up. We're gonna we're gonna be kayaking either way.
Right. And that trip, there was a lot of things that stuck out to me. And one of the main reasons that I invited you is because this is not, a trip out west to the Grand Canyon or to Mount Zion. Like, this was what I
Mhm.
would consider to be like looking at small nature, if you can say it that way.
Mhm.
And we went on this trip, and I don't even know if you remember, but something that was really a highlight for me was this great turtle. I call him the yoga turtle because he had three of his legs on the branch, and like one leg was stretched out to the side. And
Yeah,
we
I
just
do
had,
remember that.
yeah, we just had like all this appreciation for this turtle. And I don't think that we usually look at things like that. When we went on this trip with you, you pointed out just the tiniest things. You would point out like the trees, or there'd be a sand crab. There was all these little things. We did see some river otters, but you just
Mhm.
would point out everything. And so tell me a little bit about finding that appreciation in what I call small nature.
Yeah, I mean, I guess definitely with your, like, grand landscapes, like you were saying, the Grand Canyon, it's like a marvel in itself, and we were in the South Carolina swamp, right? So,
Hmm.
even rolling off the tongue, I'm sure some people are like, "Oh, swamp, South Carolina swamp."
Yeah.
But you're right, like, it is about, like, finding the beauty in everything because everything does have a purpose, in those grand landscapes, like the picture shots of the Grand Canyon, you can get that same type of shot where we were in the swamp, but there might be a lot more things spread throughout it, right? So, in a sense, that turtle was, something that we focus on. It was really cool to see not only because of the pose it was doing, but the expanse that it seemed like we were traveling through. Like it had so many other places it could have been, right? So maybe that's something that allowed me to focus on that and point things out, right? There's so much it's important, right? There's so much around you that not many people will take their time to notice, but if you do, it can open your mind to like what the world's really like, you know?
Yeah, there was this mushroom that we came across. I don't know if you remember that, and
Mhm.
your fellow guide knocked it down and cooked it up for us.
Yeah, that was really awesome. That was lion's mane, and how often do people go out these days and actually, like, forage for their own food, especially, like, on a camping trip? But that was actually a really, cool moment for me because I was like, even with doing what I do daily, guiding and things, that was still special to me to actually be out there and cook it up fresh for everybody, and I'm glad everybody tried it too. Some people were skeptical.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I was like, well, it didn't kill us. And having a guide, I think, was nice because it did let me, I would have not cooked a mushroom on my own. And
Yeah.
like being like, okay, this is not going to kill me. Right. So that was really nice. And
Mhm.
I'd referenced this book, the book where the crawdads sing. And I said, I kind of feel like
Yes.
Kaya out here. I kind of feel like the marsh girl, just like really appreciating all these little tiny bugs and just all these little things that you would find. And I found that experience to be just really good for my mind. We have our brain and our mind, but it's like
Mhm.
all of a sudden you really had to be aware. Instead of daily, right? Like I probably have the same routine just about every day and I go through the
Mhm.
motions. But when you're doing something like this, you just have to be much more cognizant of everything. The modern conveniences weren't just sitting there. So you really had to think things through a little bit and kind of plan
Mhm.
some things out. And I think it was just a good experience to stretch myself and to be in nature, which, as we know, is always good.
Yeah, I think that's super important and really cool to, like, hear your perspective on it as well because with doing it so much, it might not be something that I think about all the time, that it is that special, right? Like, of course, I know that, but, you know, day by day, it's like, "Oh, I was here yesterday. It was pretty cool." Um, but, that's what these trips and, when it comes to being a guide, like, hearing experiences like that, that's really what, makes it super fulfilling because it does remind you that once upon a time in human history, this was the most normal thing, and now it's not necessarily considered normal to go out into the swamp and spend 4 days with strangers and, you know, make a fire and poop in the woods, So it is yeah, it's very cool to hear that.
Yeah, that was, another thing is that for those who wonder if you need to use the bathroom, we got a lesson in that. You take this little bag and dig a little hole, and then you burn your toilet paper. So it really is an adventure, and just kind of this, okay, like this is where I'm at. I mean, there is no easy way out, and you still really embrace it. And I know the
Mhm.
one day we went, what was the island we went to?
We went to Bull's Island,
Yeah, Bull's
within
Island.
what is called the Cape Romaine National Wildlife Refuge.
And that was a nice place. It was particularly rough weather. I remember it being so cold,
Yeah.
and that's hard for me. And I thought, how on earth does Tayt handle these type of weather conditions? So how do you do that? If you're doing, you're trying to give people this sort of therapeutic experience where they're becoming one with nature and all that, and then the conditions are not great. How do you handle that challenge?
Yeah, and I will say too, being cold is also a challenge for me.
You
Um,
handled it well.
but yeah, so I guess it was definitely was starting this, experience as a naturalist that I've been, kind of I've always been going out in nature, but this specific job, I guess you could say,
Hmm.
is going on for about 4 years. So like it was a learning experience to not only acknowledge the weather, but to make sure you have the proper mindset, right? Because it's not just me out there. Like I'm still out there to facilitate a positive experience, right? So it's just all about being positive about it. And like a lot of times I think my first, like just say I'm out kayaking, just on a tour on the day, and it starts pouring out of nowhere. It's just like I'll just start yelling and screaming and be like, "Woo! This is what it's like to feel alive. Like we don't get to go inside right now. We just gotta. This is what it used to be like. This is awesome. This is the power of nature." So you kind of got to put yourself in that mindset a little bit in order to, because I guess at the end of the day, those thoughts are like you can beat those thoughts of being cold a little bit if you just distract yourself with with other things that are happening.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Mhm.
You said something that's, I know, very true for me, right? If we don't like the temperature, we just change it at home. And we've
Yeah.
gotten really good at making things comfortable for ourselves. And so becoming more adaptable to nature is a skill. And my children, they'll go out in all weathers. Just they
Mhm.
haven't yet learned that, oh, you don't have to do that. I mean, I guess I encourage them to go out anyway, but it is like sort of reteaching myself that just because it's raining doesn't mean I can't go out for 17 minutes, or just because it's
Mhm.
cold. And so relearning how to just exist in nature, dress appropriately, and then still go outside is something that I don't think we're good at in our country.
Yeah, because most of us, like, I guess, don't have to anymore, right?
Right.
We have the luxury of being able to hide from the elements. But one good thing about that day in particular is when stuff like that does happen, when the conditions might not be optimal, it is a good teaching moment from a naturalist perspective to just show people the example of the power of nature and how volatile it can be, because the next day it could have been 70 and sunny, It
Right.
just it was what we were dealing with at the time, and like you said, you just gotta adapt to it and have the that positive mindset.
Right. And, I should say we did actually see an alligator when we were resting our kayaks and getting a snack. He was hidden
Mhm.
back in there. You actually saw him first. I remember you kind of like pointing, and he was so camouflaged in. And I was like, oh, we're all excited. So everybody's like taking our pictures. The thing doesn't move at all. And, it was really cool. And when I got service again, I called my sister-in-law and I let her know. I'm like, tell my son, he's 5 years old. I'm like, tell him that mommy and daddy saw an alligator. And I thought he'd be so impressed. And he was like, well, crocodiles are more fiercer. So, so he was not
He is
impressed.
right. He is right.
He is. And we had a book about the difference. And so I guess he remembered from the book, but I was like, well, dang, my little guy's not very impressed, but I was impressed to see this. I mean, we got pretty close, safely close, but we got close enough to get some decent pictures, that was a
Mhm.
surprise. And the way that thing camouflaged, it was like, I'm sure that we kayaked past many others that we just didn't even notice.
Truly, I mean, I guess, a reason why something like that has existed for millions of years, right? It's camo, not only like the coloration, but it's ridges on its back and what some people call spikes on its
Mm,
tail, right? They almost like allow it to blend in with the topography of the swamp with twisted roots and things. So
yeah,
they're made to be there almost. I guess there's a good reason that they're out there is because they like it. They're designed to be there.
definitely. Maybe you can give some advice because you have access to being in nature a lot. And somebody in an urban setting or a really busy setting, what advice do you have for them to integrate nature into their daily lives?
Yeah, that's a great question and not something I actually think about often. I have been, well, with my mindset at least, I've been blessed enough to always have access to some sort of nature, whether it was a state park like behind my house growing up or just not being in an extremely urban area. But I would definitely just advise like one thing, just get out there, and get out there without your phone. Because I think how you started the podcast off was great with saying those 17 minutes, I believe it was.
Yeah,
And, those 17 minutes without technology as well, just to
definitely.
like take time and listen. For people in urban areas, I really do think birding is a great thing to do because birds have adapted well to urban areas. And obviously there's parks and things, but more importantly, I would just suggest driving to a place that is not urbanized, like a mountain or a big park or the coast and just being there, away from horns beeping and all that. That's probably the best advice. But birding is a really nice hobby to have for people. Even if you don't know anything about birds, it is pretty cool to go out and use an app and listen to the calls and be like, oh, I've never seen this one before. And the more you do that, the more you'll notice them. And, it could be an excuse to go outside, right?
Yeah, that's really, yeah.
Mm.
I mean, you even had a flamingo down there somewhere, right?
Yeah, on Bulls Island actually this year. It left and it came back. I believe it was the first flamingo spotted in South Carolina since 1969.
But
And because they aren't here, right? They
right. He didn't
a lot
belong
of
there.
Yeah, it was a storm event. I think it was like Hurricane Idalia that came through somewhere in the Caribbean where it was really heavy and it just, pushed maybe things were like flying and it pushed them off course. And I mean, there were even flamingos in Ohio at that same time that people were seeing.
Oh,
So
wow.
those crazy weather patterns can cause some odd uh, birds to exist, but it was really cool that this one decided to stay on Bulls Island for like a few months. And I believe at this current time it's gone, but it had left and then it came back for another month. So hopefully it went back to where it belongs. But
He's going to have some stories to tell.
yeah, yeah. It's impressive that it stayed.
Yeah, Bulls Island was interesting because there was all those sand dollars and then there was also some dolphins. It was a really unique experience. And I think
Hmm.
I think I kind of went in with no expectations, which is probably the best way to go into nature. Just not tell nature what you're out to see, just kind of let yourself
Yes.
see whatever is revealed to you. And I was
Hmm.
just, it was like, kind of like one thing after another. But the sand dollars, I've never seen so many sand dollars. They were just everywhere. Perfect sand dollars, not a crack in them. That was really cool. I brought some home. They were already dead, everybody,
Hmm.
so don't worry. I didn't kill them. But you
We
also,
made sure.
yes, yes. And you said something about like how birding would give you a reason to get out there. And I hate the cold. As a
Hmm.
general rule, if it's snowing, that's fine because I can go out in my snow gear. But you can't walk around in that if it's cold and there's no snow. I mean, maybe you
Hmm.
could, but people would look at you funny. And so about a year ago, I picked up skiing as a hobby. And I think it was honestly more of just a necessity. Like I needed some sort of physical activity that I could do outside and not freeze to
Mhm.
death. And, when you have all your gear on, I was skiing this year in single digits because with the correct gear, I was warm enough. But it really did drive me to go outside more. It's like, okay, I'm going to go skiing this weekend. And had I not come up with some activity to be outside, I wouldn't have just voluntarily said, I'm going to go stand out there. So I did need some
Mhm.
sort of motivator to get me outside.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, I guess, in our case here with kayaking too. You can pick up some sort of skill that gets you outdoors to motivate you just to open more doors, right? Because even if you aren't into birds and you want to learn how to kayak, you're
Hmm.
going to start kayaking in places where birds are. And you might be like, you know what? Maybe I just need to combine two of these things. And also, even something like as simple as fishing and kayaking, just that combo can really help you to just maybe if you're trapped in an urban area or if you're just trying to if it's a goal of yours to get outside more, hobbies are extremely important.
Another thing that I appreciated about you, because even though I did tent camp, my husband bought this ridiculous like REI self-inflatable mattress
Oh
and
yeah.
and then had like this great North Face sleeping bag. So we kind of glamped our tent a bit, but you slept in this little tent. Did you even have a mattress?
I did. I had a little mat that I was sleeping on. Um, I'm all for the type of pad that y'all had though. That's the good stuff because that's also a thing. Like if you have the option to be comfortable in nature when you go camp, especially when it comes to sleeping,
Yeah.
by all means do that. Like that's the part where you use modern society to allow you to succeed more, right? Because
Yes.
nobody wants to be on a 4-day camping trip with tossing and turning all night, right? But yeah, I just carry a little pad, and honestly, by the end of the day on these trips, I'm just so tired, I could probably sleep on a floating log.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, we were there for our anniversary, and it was 15 years that we went for this anniversary trip. And sort of the joke was we wanted to be married by year 16, so we needed to get some sleep. So we needed a good mattress. Something that I do with clients is grounding, which is a really common technique. And it's a way to integrate our senses, and it's best done in nature. So it's like if you go outside and say, what is it you see? What is it you hear? What is it you taste? What is it you smell? And what is it you feel, like touch externally? And I think
Mhm.
that's really important because we go outside and our brain isn't registering all the time all the things we hear, whether it's the wind or the birds or all these other sounds that are in nature, leaves crinkling. Like we don't necessarily hear that
Mhm.
because our brain isn't paying attention to it. That's where it's like that whole mindfulness piece, making your mind be aware of the nature around you and really appreciate. Like if you picked up a blade of grass, you could really sit there and just notice its veins or its color or whatever. And so you can do these things without having access to big nature, I feel like. What do you think?
I 100% agree. I mean, you can go into your backyard and spend an entire year learning about everything that is just trapped within the fence of your backyard, right? From
Yeah.
microorganisms to bugs to the plants. There's so much around us, and I guess I'll use birds in it as an example. Again, sometimes we go out with something like a school group, and you have kids that are like, "Oh wow, that's a pelican," blah blah, and then you have others that are like, "Oh, they're just birds," and it's like even
Yeah.
though they look different, they're birds, but that's the if you're willing, that's the gap that you can bridge, right? Because there's so much stuff out there that nobody even knows about, like there's stuff that happens every day. It was like I saw this article about this underwater volcano off the coast of Chile that they discovered over 100 new species of various sea creatures on a dive, obviously like a submarine dive.
Mm.
So, things like that. So imagine there's like small percentage of people that know all the wildlife in their backyard.
Yeah.
And I guess that was a big step for me in, I don't know, becoming who I am now as just started like, huh, what is this? And then I looked it up and I was like, huh, that's cool. I had no clue that this small southeastern crown snake was living in my flower bed underneath this potted plant, right? And it's
Right.
just there all the time. I'd never heard of it before. So yeah, just being investigate nature, and you have to, like you said, you got to open your mind to it.
There's other science out there that says that we have a big barrier between us and nature because we always go outside with shoes, and
Hmm.
that's, a newer phenomenon and in terms of humanity. And it's interesting because my children, like probably most children, will not wear shoes most of the summer. They're just it's like this constant, can you put your
Hmm.
shoes on? And they never have shoes. And what do you think of that? Do you think that there's any truth to that? Do you ever purposely walk around without shoes?
Yeah, I do all the time.
Okay.
I don't, for me personally, like, I don't know if it's like based on some sort of connection, but I'm just trying to be like, just want to toughen up my feet just in case. I was in the past, I've lived in the Bahamas, and I got to the point where I was like not even wearing shoes, like going into a store, and I was like, okay, maybe I should just put shoes on at least for that.
You had to come back to
Um,
humanity a little.
yeah, but no, I mean, it's, I guess, what's the saying is there's something about putting your toes in the sand, right?
Yeah.
And just walking through. It's fun to walk with no shoes on.
Yeah, I knew a guy
Definitely. I
who
have
ran
I
with
have a
no
lot of friends
shoes.
that don't wear them.
I knew a guy, he had told me he had been stopped twice by the police. He would jog with no shoes. And he actually, I think he went on a missions trip and he started to notice how nobody wore shoes, like when they were running or anything in one of these countries. And
Hmm.
he stopped wearing shoes when he ran. And yeah, he said he'd been stopped twice by the police. And I thought that was interesting. But the no shoe thing, I think this summer I'm going to try it a little more, like try to give up my shoes, spend more time in my
Yeah.
yard, see if I feel a therapeutic benefit. It's kind of subjective, but I'm going to give it a try.
I guess some people can get some stuff out of it. For me, I don't. I mean, you definitely hear stories about certain cultures that would like ground themselves and get energy from the earth, right? I I'm sure that there could definitely be something to that. Not gonna rule anything out in this day and age, but yeah, for me personally, I love being barefoot outside. It's like that primal feeling, and that's kind of the base of, I guess, our discussion is putting yourself back to where your ancestors once were, right? Without buildings and without cars and all that.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise we got to get out of our head for sure.
Hmm.
Since you've been a guide for so long, is there any personal stories you can share with us to just that we might find humorous or just some things that maybe you had to deal with as a guide that were not easy?
Being a guide, specifically doing like overnight camping excursions and kayaking long periods of time, there's always something that is going to happen. Like, you go into a multi-day trip with the mindset of knowing that you're going to have to perform, right?
Mhm.
And um, so there's always something that goes wrong, whether it's as small as like a flat tire on the trailer, and making sure that everybody's okay in the camp while you're over there, like fixing a tire, making sure nobody's like, "Uh-oh, are we about to be stranded?" Like not exposing people to the behind the scenes stuff, but so something as minimal as that, or something a little bit more potentially dangerous or meaningful, right? As somebody flipping over in a kayak, because we do wear skirts. We wear those spray skirts,
Yeah.
but we also carry some gear. One time I can think specifically, we were on a portion of this overnight trip that one day we do a 15-mile paddle, and this is starting off on the Santee River, which is a large river in South Carolina, and flowing down through some smaller creeks. And there's one in particular on these overnight trips that I thought of when you mentioned telling a story, and this one, it was flowing kind of fast, and we were like, okay, it's like nothing like we haven't like seen before. So we hopped out there, and everybody's like having a great time. There was an elderly couple that ended up. We cut off the Santee. We cut into this smaller creek, and it was flowing very fast. And because it was a lot of water going into a small space, and at this time we're like, okay, it's like the low country lazy river, right? We're just flowing. We You don't even have to paddle. It's a small section of this 15 miles, and um, long story short, this couple did flip over. And when something like that happens, of course, I'm trained to handle that scenario.
Right.
Uh, and in this particular case, it was at a bend, and there was a tree in the middle. So they flipped over and kind of drifted into this tree that was mostly underwater. And the other guide and myself, first thing, we have to make sure nobody else is going to flip over at this part, right? Make sure they get through safe, make sure that they pull over so that we can perform this rescue in pretty flowing water. This was probably the worst place that they could have flipped over,
Of
but
course.
also I guess would be the most likely. And it's just a test. The world gives you tests sometime to see if you're a guide or not, I guess. And because it's not all about telling people what bird they're looking at. So this is where you have to come into that mindset. It's like this is what I'm here for, truly, is to not only facilitate an experience, but to show why we're in charge, right? To show why these lovely people signed up to go out with us. So, long story short, we it took a little bit, but we managed to rescue them. I mean, there were some hiccups with the boats trying to get sucked under because it was flipped over. There were some hiccups with when we were towing them over to the bank that they flipped our own kayaks. So at one point, I was out of my kayak, holding onto a tree branch, holding on to a couple other kayaks and a human being. Um, and just to make sure that we could get them to the bank, right? If I were to let go, they just would have been floating, right? Flowing
Right.
down. But given the scenario of them not being as physically able, it was a one of those things that just makes you, it's like, oh, it's like the mother lifting the car, right,
Right.
to save
You got some
save her
adrenaline there.
baby trapped under it, right? So, um, yeah, that specific scenario actually, it taught me a lot about myself, and it's something that I think about from time to time. And I know when I told y'all on the trip, that was definitely something just that brought us all together too.
Yeah, and that couple's gonna have this awesome story to tell forever.
Exactly, yeah. They're like, yeah, we got saved. We almost got swept away down Chicken Creek. There's a lot of they were oh, the funniest part I forgot to say, like, they were not very okay with alligators.
Oh, no.
And before we got to this turn, I'm talking like a massive alligator, like almost max length. We're talking like 14, 15 feet.
Oh,
That
wow.
was just floating in the water right at this bend. So when they flipped over, uh, the lovely, lovely lady, like, she came right out of the water, and she said, "Where's the gator?" She
Oh,
wasn't
no.
worried about her boat or any of her stuff. She was like, or that she flipped over in a potentially dangerous scenario. She said, "Where's the gator?" And it's like, it's funny that that was the first thought,
Right.
because that gator didn't care about them at all.
Well, I was gonna say the alligator we saw looked like he was staying very still so that we would just go away. Like,
Yep.
he had no
He was
interest
like,
in
"I'm
us.
blending in. You can
Well,
take your picture, but I'm gonna stay here."
right, right.
Yeah, they get a bad reputation, alligators, especially ones in really wild environments. They'll see you coming and they'll be gone. They don't want anything to do with you.
Yeah. I mean, our trip was definitely out there, like, we weren't passing other kayakers. It was just a
Yeah.
really secluded tour. But, well, Tayt, thank you for joining us today. Where can people find more about your naturalist experiences?
Oh yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking. So Instagram would be a good way. It's underscore Tayt. I'm also a naturalist guide for a company called Coastal Expeditions in Charleston, South Carolina. So if you're ever in that area and want to go on a really cool nature tour, definitely check out that website. And also, if you want to check out Tate's Nature Show, which is what I'm trying to build on YouTube, you can search that as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you for having me, and I hope it was informative.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into Mental Health and Me, sponsored by the Listen Frederick Podcast Network. You can find me on Instagram at Natalie Souders _. Thanks for listening.
Live radio, local podcasts, the Frederick Podcast Network at listenfrederick.com.